In metaphysics, my philosophy, objectivism, holds that there is only one reality, not two, nor four, nor 10.
Hello and welcome to Reality. My name is William, and in just a few minutes you'll be hearing from Lev. Today we are discussing video games. We ask the question, how should we make value judgments while playing video games? Now we're interested in all sorts of games, both old and new. I'm mostly familiar with the older games, Nintendo and PlayStation games. I used to play Super Mario Brothers and Punch-Out and Civilization and Call of Duty, but I am a little familiar with the modern games. I've watched people play Fortnite, played it a little myself, but I don't really play games anymore. But I have seen Fortnite and I've seen Grand Theft Auto, so I have a sense of what those are all about. We're interested in choices you make while playing these games. So in-game decision making, and we're interested in evaluating these choices to determine the moral status. Now, I think the important context to keep in mind here is that you are generally role-playing. You're playing a character, so you're assuming some sort of alternate identity in the game, and you're making choices based on that character. So you're not making real life choices in the game. You're pretending, you're having fun, and no one's getting hurt. So that's an important context to keep in mind. Also, the point usually is to win the game. So I think that choices should be made in pursuit of victory, in pursuit of winning the game, whatever that means. Some games have multiple ways to win or succeed, so that's a question of what it means to win a game or be victorious. And in trying to win the game, you want to develop strategic thinking skills. You're trying to come up with a plan and figuring out all the right ways to act within the game, or all the right choices to make. And that requires planning, strategy. Also, you're playing to be entertained. There's art involved, there's a story, characters, theme, settings. So a lot of these games are very realistic and much like a movie, so they're highly entertaining. So you want to balance strategy with entertainment, or the joy you get out of the game. Now, the big question is, how do you deal with disturbing content, violence, acts that might be construed as hatred against certain races or sexes? How do you evaluate that sort of action within the game? Because in real life, you have a totally different morality than you would in the game. Your actions are totally different. So you need to be able to keep those two worlds separate. And you need to be able to recognize who's the villain, who's the hero, whether you're portraying the villain or the hero. And you need to keep those two worlds separate. You need to keep the game world separate from your own view of the world, because a lot of these games, they have a malevolent world view built in to the structure of the game or the plot of the game. And if you get lost in that world of the game and you start thinking this is the way it should be in reality, or you just don't think about it and you let that world kind of seep into your subconscious, you might be affected by the malevolent um, the malevolent universe premise that's underlying the game. Because if you're in a world, let's say in Grand Theft Auto, where everybody's out to destroy everybody, that could be very harmful if you start thinking that it's realistic and that's the way the real world is.
Welcome to reality, everyone. I'm Lev. Thanks, William, for your introduction. So I want to give you guys a bit better understanding of my background and why I'm interested in video games. When I first started college, I wanted to study video game design. I didn't end up going that direction, actually, but that's where I started. And so much of my interest growing up was in video games. Even on a philosophical level, I was trying to think of how video games could be artistic, how video games could be more valuable beyond simply entertainment value. And I've been playing video games since I was 5 years old. Still play them now. I actively play games like World of Warcraft or Path of Exile. I keep up to date on new games, so video games are still a very important part of my life. And not merely as entertainment, I actually consider and think about them. So when I was thinking about being a game designer, I was writing some articles on my own describing my theories of game design, how to apply that into an aesthetic way of thinking, and definitely influenced by Ayn Rand. So one concept I came up with was meta-value judgments. It's similar to what Rand said about metaphysical value judgments, that art expresses something about an artist's metaphysical value judgments. I'm putting that in the perspective of the players of games themselves, not the designer. The way value judgments are used in video games. You might think of standard examples like playing Skyrim or any of the Elder Scrolls games where you act as you're making decisions in a world where in a fantasy world of killing dragons, sealing, casting magic, or protecting innocent people. Those are examples of value judgments within games, but we can also think of it in other games. You can even think of the depth of the video game in terms of its value judgments within it by a player. Think of a game like Mega Man. If you're not familiar with that, it's just basically a blue robot made by a scientist and was a good robot, but then there's this evil doctor, Dr. Wily, and he builds robots to destroy mankind, basically. And you're playing as Mega Man. All you do is jump around and shoot bad guys. But the whole time you know who you're playing. You're Mega Man. You're killing Dr. Wily's robots. Because they're out to destroy humanity. They're out to destroy people. You are literally playing a hero. It might seem basic when you're playing the game. It might not seem like even much is going on. If you watch somebody playing it, you just see them jumping and shooting. But the player knows there's something more here. That they're spending their time thinking about a game in this way. They're thinking about saving the world. Maybe not actively, but it's there. They always know it's there. Or another game like EVE Online. It's a massive online game. You basically play like a character in outer space, and you own your ships, you can go mining, you can start corporations, you can make extensive business transactions, and it's a very big game, very in-depth. It has a lot to do with like economic value judgments, how you want to spend your time economically, in what way can you spend your time and in-game money to make even more money, or what way should you interact with people? Should you scam people? Should you make some productive endeavor to make trades people enjoy and want? Those are the things we have to think about. All these sort of questions are in video games. You might say some games might not have it, say Tetris or Pac-Man, but those might be very limited examples because they're old games. New games today, or even since the late 80s, games have all had some kind of latent value judgments within them for the players to make, the players involve themselves in. And this is very important to the value of video games and the function they can serve for us all. It doesn't matter who you are, even if you enjoy video games that much, they serve a function. They do something for your mind and your interaction with the world. We can explore our value judgments in a similar way as reading art, reading a novel. We can experience something we wouldn't otherwise experience. The thing about video games is you can take your experience to a level of actual action, not just observation, but action. And this is why we should play video games. Reality would suggest to us, by the facts of reality, that we should play video games, that it's good for us, that it's good for our way of thinking.
Lev mentions the concept of meta-value judgments. He uses this term to describe the way players use value judgments in video games. And he says that they express something about that player's metaphysical values. And he mentions that this was a concept of Ayn Rand's in her philosophy. I want to explore that a little further. Ayn Rand focused on the question of what people consider to be important. She considered this a metaphysical concept, and she said that metaphysical value judgments serve as a bridge between metaphysics and ethics. And these would be questions like, is the universe knowable? Do we have free choice? That sort of thing. And the answers to these questions form the base of a person's ethics. They offer his implicit view of reality and his sense of life. And if we apply this idea to players of video games, we can ask, are games important? So clearly, people who play a lot of video games believe that video games are important. So that in itself tells you something about their metaphysical value judgments or their metaphysical values. They believe that games are important to their moral choices, and so that kind of forms their sense of life, and they have a game-oriented view of reality. You could ask, how are the games important to game players? And you'll probably get a lot of different answers. I would assume that a lot of people would say that games are important for learning problem solving, for learning strategic thinking and gaining knowledge, even in some games that teach you skills and things about the world. Could be important for motivating oneself. But I would also point out that any knowledge you gain in a game isn't reality-based knowledge, it's fantasy-based knowledge. Since the game, it's a virtual reality. It's not objective reality that you would deal with in a day-to-day situation. So, because it's fantasy, it might not be useful in the real world. For example, how to kill a dragon isn't really useful in the real world since there aren't dragons in the world. However, how to organize a hunting party and go on a quest or perform or take yourself on an adventure, motivate yourself to track something in the wilderness and kill it, that might be useful. That sort of knowledge. depends on what sort of things you're learning in the game. It might be bad suggestions or good tips. So video games are only useful in that regard if they're giving you good knowledge that pertains to reality. Also, video games could lose their usefulness once you figure out how to properly act in the real world or in society. So if you're using games for that purpose, to learn how to act or learn how to be human, then you're not going to need the video games anymore after you develop your own moral system and learn how to be rational and good. So I think my takeaway here is that you want to focus on the things that you find important about the video game, and that will tell you something about your metaphysical values. For example, how do you select a character in the game? Do you select the character based on what you think is beautiful or ugly, popular or unique, common or exotic? Or do you just pick a character that you think will help you win the game? Is winning more important to you than falling in love with your character and just enjoying playing the character? Do you want to actually beat the game? Is that your purpose? And if that's your purpose, are you going to select a character you don't like just so you can win the game?
I like where William was going with my discussion on meta-value judgments. I like most of what he was discussing, especially about how value judgments can express something about the artist or the thinker involved. The main thing I objected to, though, is when he was brought in whether something can bring in reality-based knowledge, whether there's something about reality that it tells you concretely. I think that's a mistake to talk about here. That would be relevant, of course, if we're talking about educational video games, but we're not really focusing on that right now. We want to talk about choices you make within video games as far as choices that are supposed to make you experience a world, make you part of a world, but to whatever extent that might be. Like I was mentioning about Mega Man, and that's of course not trying to tell you anything about reality per se. It's not telling you how robots work or anything like that. And I would say it doesn't matter what kind of game it is. That's not even what any game is supposed to do. And the same way historical fiction and books, it may have facts of reality. It might teach you something new, but that's not the point. It doesn't even need to do that. A parallel game to that would be Oregon Trail, where there are historical facts to it. But the idea is you're trying to make decisions to get from Missouri to, I believe, Oregon. And the choices you make along the way and the things that can happen and death that can occur. I mean, that's a video game with choices involved. Or the game Civilization, there might be historical information there, but that's not really the point. It's trying to show you how civilizations can develop and then various kinds of decisions that might need to go into that. As with any game, it narrows down what you could involve. You don't want every detailed reality in anything. That's why we have entertainment or anything artistic. We have to take some things out of what we're looking at. Otherwise, we're going to be overwhelmed with information. When we're talking about choices in video games, it's not just the fact you're making choices that matters, but that any choice in the context of video games will be something deeper than a pragmatic need. It's not supposed to have anything pragmatic about it. other than strictly what's within that game, what you're trying to accomplish. What you can gain from video games or any kind of thing that involves choices aesthetically is you're learning how to be human, how to think, how to live in reality in whatever context that might be, the way you grapple with reality. When you play a character, you're always making some choice. There will always be some aesthetic choice about the character. It doesn't mean you have to agree with the character, but you are living a value judgment. The thing about video games is you can live out value judgments other than your own, not just seeing what appeals to you, but then what appeals to you and how you can explore psychology of others, how you can contemplate what can go on in a character's mind. And that's a place, video games have a unique place where literature can't serve that function really. You can't be a character. You can reflect upon thoughts characters have, but you can't be that character. Actors might do that, but acting is different than reading. Acting has some artistic qualities to it. You have to interpret a character, act out certain qualities of that character. You have to elaborate who they are psychologically that a writer can't include. And this is a unique place for video games. You don't have to be a trained actor to experience those types of value judgments. We might play a game like Skyrim, like I was talking last time. These There will always be value judgments in there that are important to one's way of thinking. You learn different ways of thinking, and that plays a very strong cognitive role. We have to contemplate what the cognitive function of video games can be, and that cognitive function it will expand and improve your life, no matter what kind of game it is. We can praise different video game designers for doing a better job than others, but there is always some presence of value judgments in video games, and that adds an extra dimension that we should value and we should pursue. And I encourage anyone else to not think of their video game playing as some purely entertainment function, but even entertainment can have valuable functions.
Lev brought up the similarity between role playing video games and acting. Actors will embody a character, and to some degree, that's like video games. However, I think the closer comparison would be to puppeteering, because there is the physical separation between the player and his character. The puppeteer has this physical object, his puppet, that he manipulates with the strings. And in video games, the player has a virtual puppet, an avatar, that he manipulates with the game controller or the keyboard. So I think the physical separation is important. There's also a psychological separation I see where the actor actually tries to think like the character and take on the mentality or the psychology of the character so he can easily speak as that character. Whereas in most role-playing video games, you don't have that. It's more like you're projecting some ideas onto the character in the game. And this reminds me of how children play with dolls and action figures. When I was a kid, I used to play with G.I. Joe action figures, and I had some female cousins who played with Cabbage Patch dolls. And I think the the purpose of this activity is mostly about control. I think what video game players and children who play with dolls, what they're doing is they're learning how to control a character. And I think at the root, it's about free will, it's about choice. So Lev is correct to focus on choices within the games. We are with the children, they're making choices for this doll. They're projecting their own free will onto the doll. So, or action figure. And they're also coming up with their own little fantasy story. But at the root of it, I think it is about psychology. It's about choice making. It's about projecting judgments onto that puppet, that whatever you're using as a puppet. Now I'll conclude by briefly mentioning a distinction between character values and player values. And these would be values that are good for you as the player versus values that are good for your character in the game. And I think that these are two different purposes for playing a game and for making choices within the game. And they can be confused. You might think that you're making the right choices for your character, but really you're just making choices for you as the player because you want to have fun. You want to experience different things. Whereas your character, if your character has a character and it's not just you playing, then your character requires certain in-game values in order to succeed and survive and accomplish goals and fulfill the quest. So if you're just out to see all the different realms or engage with all the different characters and have fun interacting, then that might not be what's in the best interest of your character in the game. So you need to focus on that aspect of it and make sure that you're clear on your purpose for playing the game. Are you trying to achieve the character's values in your decision making, or are you trying to achieve your purpose as a player and like do whatever you want to do in the game? That could include winning. That could include exploring. That could include making the perfect character or the perfect society, that if it's a nation building game, for example. Now, for morality, I think that the only real question here for me is your personal reason for playing the game. Are you playing the game to enjoy the game, to have a fun experience, to be entertained, to appreciate the art or the artistic endeavor that went into creating that game? Or are you trying to escape reality? Are you trying to evade something in your own life? Like if you have trouble socializing with other people, if you don't go on adventures in real life, are you substituting the video game for something you should be doing in reality? And if you are, if you're evading a problem or you're escaping reality for the video game world, that might be a problem. That might be immoral. It's something to consider. And I think I'll end with that. And I look forward to your comments.
There are an infinite number of possible personal reasons to play video games. But the thing we're focusing on is the people who are engaged and care about playing video games and are already engaged in their life somewhat. I'm not trying to argue or persuade somebody that they should pay attention to their life or they should pay attention to everything that they do. We're focusing on the people who are already at that level. So when you're playing a video game, we can talk about the way making choices makes you question and think about values and your place within. People, of course, might be disengaged and not even reflect on those things. But that's always already a kind of moral failure and already a kind of self-ignorance that you're not engaging with what you do and you're not going to benefit from all these possible things. I'm assuming intellectual engagements. And many games can assume that. To even play the game, you have to be engaged with it. You have to think about the values of your character. You are never yourself in the game. By definition, you can't be yourself. It's a different context, different set of values, different set of experiences. So if you're playing Skyrim and you're a thief character and you're wandering the world, you always have to think about what's the context of that character's life. And you might be willing to suspend your own moral theories and moral thinking just to see what would happen or simply to live that character's life. You might think it's practical and sensible and therefore do it, and see actually there are moral consequences that you didn't like. Or sometimes you might make a decision that you think initially is just, of course it's just going to be all bad, but then once you get further into the experience, you can see there is some value in it, that there may have been something you didn't consider before. And to use Skyrim again, you can join a guild that is a bunch of assassins, but they're not simply killing whoever they want. They have particular strategies in mind. There was even a political strategy in mind of their engagement. You could judge those characters as you wish. The point is that if you do anything within a game, you have to engage as that character. It's not a moral commandment. That's just how you do it in the first place. You can't think about that game divorced from that game. You can't necessarily apply your thinking outside of that game. Or even if you play Super Mario Brothers and just jumping on top of an enemy, it might be a silly context to think about values, but it's still values nonetheless, even if it is simplified. Simplifying pursuit of values is not itself a sign of an inferior piece of work or an inferior video game. It's actually a narrowing of context. And with a narrower context, you can explore different kinds of values. Sometimes there isn't much to explore. You don't need a huge variety of options. Or other times those options are already provided for you and you're experiencing like a story, albeit one that you're experiencing directly and a part of. That brings me to another point William was making about comparing video game playing to puppeteering rather than acting. I don't actually think there's an important distinction to be made between the two. Sure, the puppeteers have to use different strings or controls, but if we look at, say, Jim Henson, his sort of characters, whether you know the Dark Crystal or Fraggle Rock or just the Muppets, that's just acting like anything else. Sure, there are puppets, and sometimes there's more than one person controlling the puppet, but the voice, the mind behind the particular character is acting. It's not any different. When you project ideas onto something versus acting out yourself, I don't think there's any practical difference. You can project yourself onto a character, or project your own ideas onto your own body. I don't want to have a mind-body distinction there. So that's why I say there is no distinction between projecting versus acting. When you're acting a role, that's acting. It doesn't matter where it is, whether it's a puppet or a video game controller or your own body performing as another character. These are all types of projecting, I would say. By projecting, you are experiencing those values. If you're successful at what you're doing it correctly, then you have to be engaging that character. You have to be engaging something else other than yourself. By nature of interacting with that, you will do something more than mere entertainment. Video games might seem different, though, because it might seem one more step removed, that you're controlling a controller, which then controls something within a game. That you're like a puppeteer controlling the controls from another controller. It can be seen very detached. Except the human mind is more capable of understanding where it is than that. It doesn't need some extra reminder that it's in there. Tools can be an extension of our mind. And video games don't have to be any different than that. They might be a tool to use within our own minds. We can't use it to accomplish something additional physical, but it's a way to experience living life. And any video game can be part of that, whether it's Mega Man or Skyrim or Pac-Man. Certain games engage in it better, and we can praise those for engaging so much more about life and different choices within life. But all games will choose it if a person engages in it, if you reflect on what you do and why you do it. And ultimately, if you keep practicing with that, you can understand video games as a form of cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy being, can you think in other modes of thought other than the ones you use normally or as your personality? How can you engage in other modes of thinking? And there's a great deal of cognitive value in that. I know William was talking about how he thought that playing with toys is about power, but there's been a lot of research into that. And I'm a psychology student myself, and I've always been very interested in creative thought and cognitive development. And some of my own research into it suggests that any type of play is crucial to expanding your cognitive understanding of reality, and crucial to understanding how others think, crucial in engaging with causality with the world. And if you're playing a video game, that's the same sort of principle. You're engaging with reality to have control over your actions, understand what they do, understand what certain actions do. It's a deeply personal engagement that you have with a video game. When you engage with that, you expand or improve your own ways of thinking that would thereby improve your own life.
Thank you for watching this episode of Welcome to Reality. Please join us next time for another discussion where we apply philosophical ideas to moral and political action. To support the show, please share our content and consider becoming a sponsor. You'll find a link to our Patreon page in the description of this video.